Hello guys, from time to time I update my free repository of Laravel tips on GitHub. Now in November we've reached 5,000 stars on GitHub and currently we have more than 300 random quick Laravel tips. And the last update from November, with my colleagues we not only added 30 new tips, but also cleaned up the older ones, updated the syntax to Laravel 9, and deleted a few irrelevant ones, which were mostly replaced by the framework itself with new features instead of old tips, workarounds to do some stuff. So in this video I want to present you 5 random new tips about Laravel, and if you want more of those I will give you the link to this repository. So what that repository has inside, divided into sections, table of contents, mostly is about models and Eloquent, and that's why Eloquent is #1 topic in general for questions and tips. That's why my latest course about Laravel expert level is so popular. But let's pick 5 random tips about other topics and quickly run through them. So the first tip I've chosen for this video is about validation. What if you have some field which may be present only if some other field is checked? For example, is company may be a field in the form like checkbox. Is it a company or not? If it is a company, then some fields about the companies are present, including company name, which is required only if is company is true, checked. So for that cases, there's a rule required if accepted. And this tip comes on Twitter from Gurmandeep. I often retweet the tips, then save them into my notes, then add them to the repository with the link to the original tip. So that's tip #1 for today. Tip #2 is about Blade, or in fact Blade components. So since one of the later versions of Laravel, which is 9.32, currently at the time of shooting this video the latest one is 9.40, so 8 weeks ago they released a shorter syntax. So quite often you need to provide a parameter which is basically the same as variable, just in camel case for example. Now you don't need to have longer version, you just can do shorter user ID, and Blade and Laravel will automatically understand that this is the variable name. So this is just a shorter syntax for Blade component parameters. That's tip #2. Tip #3 is about routing. Again, from one of the later Laravel versions, 9.35 in this case. Did you know that you can do route resource with trashed? For example, you have soft deleted trashed records, but you still want to use them in resource controllers with route model binding. Before 9.35, you could do that only for GET requests, like this, for show method. Now, if you provide that for route resource, it will be present on show, edit, or other route model binding methods, or you can specify that with trashed would be just for the show, but not for the edit, for example. So again, that's a new thing in Laravel 9.35. Tip #4 is about Carbon. It's not exactly about Laravel specifically, but for Carbon you can specify some parameters for diff for humans. And I've tweeted about that. I even posted that on YouTube as a community screenshot and it became hugely popular. But for those of you who haven't seen, you can specify difference for humans. So instead of 17 hours ago, you can specify parts 2 and it would show with minutes. If it were part 3, it would also include seconds, like this. So parts 3, and also you can override the join, specify the comma instead of just a space here. So join comma, and then here we have comma. Also, you can specify short true, which would transform hours, minutes, and seconds to just H, M, and S. And that may also depend on locale. So if you work with Spanish, for example, Carbon supports a lot of languages inside of that, so those would be also shortened. And finally, tip #5 for today for this video comes from, on Twitter, from Daniel, who is tweeting about redirecting with Fragment. When you want to redirect back to the page, but to specific anchor, to specific part of the page, for example, or specific open tab, maybe you have that logic on the front end, you can specify redirect with Fragment. And then that fragment name is added to the end of the URL, and you can then parse it on the front end or just use the default behavior of anchors in HTML. So these are just 5 random tips. You can take a look at the full repository with more than 300 tips. And also you can watch those tips If you, for example, visit the homepage of Laravel Daily.com, as a part of the homepage, we show one random tip out of those 341 tips at the moment. And also, we've built a system to auto-tweet one of those tweets every day. So for example, if you see this on my timeline, this comes automatically from one of those tips once per day. So you can also follow me on Twitter at Povilas to get tips like this one on your timeline of Twitter. And of course, subscribe to the channel. I will keep putting daily videos with tips, tutorials, tools, and other Laravel advice. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.